Hello, this is Pastor Don Long, and here we are once again in our Grafted In broadcast. We began a series last week that I titled A World Gone Crazy. I encourage you, if you're just tuning into this broadcast and you missed last week's, to go into the archives at FATV and find it. Each one is going to build on the next one, and I really don't want to get into recapping what I said last week, or it'll take us a long time to get through this. But I'm talking about the fact that it's a dark day in America. Now, the question is, Pastor, why are you addressing this in a Jewish Roots broadcast? Because the Bible, which is the root of Christianity, the Old Testament, which is the foundation under which our faith is built, speaks a lot about the future, speaks a lot about the end times, what is coming down the road, describes the course of nations, describes God's plan to have us to move in an upward fashion, but describes that mankind, in fact, continues to move in cycles that take man away from God, that ultimately lead to, as in the days of Noah, which is what Yeshua described the end times. It's going to be as in the days of Noah. And in Genesis chapter 6, we read in verse 5 that Yahweh saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become, this is the days of Noah, and that every inclination of the thoughts of man's heart was only evil all the time. Yeshua said that's where we're going to end up again, that's where we're headed, and certainly that's where we're headed in America. I spent the last half of our broadcast last time reading and making some comments on an article by Dennis Prager that was written in May this past month, A Dark Time in America, where he describes that he believes that we are now in the darkest time in American history, not in terms of wars like the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, World Wars I, II, Korea, Vietnam. Those were worse in terms of loss of life. Certainly the Great Depression, Dennis says, was worse in economic terms. But what is worse now is there is a total pessimistic view encompassing America about our future, about whether America has a future. And if we look at the Bible, that should not surprise us, because America is not going to get better and better and better, but biblically and prophetically, we are entering some pretty scary times. And the underlying foundation that causes Dennis to comment on, Dennis Prager, he says this, that every distinctive value on which America was founded is now in jeopardy. Every distinctive value. What does he mean by that? That every value that made America great is now being challenged and questioned. Every belief system, every value that our founding fathers said we're going to found a nation on this value system, we now have a generation that says we don't believe those values. We don't want those values. And yet those are the values that made America great. In fact, it is those values that allow this generation to go crazy. It is the freedom of democracy that allows people to come and vote democracy out. Our forefathers said that when the bulk of the people begin to realize that the government can benefit them, they will vote into office people who personally benefit their greed individually, and now democracy will fail. And that those who are takers will rule over those who are the givers into society. What our American founding fathers feared in terms of government in the executive branch, government in Congress, and government in the judicial branch is coming true. They feared a Supreme Court that would act like the judicial system in England at the day, that simply wrote over everybody's rights. We have that Supreme Court now. They feared an executive branch that would act with kingly authority. We have such an executive branch right now that routinely ignores the will of the people. And yet we have a constituency in America who are oblivious to this, like the Israelites of old, running after whatever pleases themselves and not aware that the foundation underneath the country is rapidly eroding. And so he highlighted some in his presentation about the fact of this value system falling apart. And he mentioned some statistics. One was this: according to Pew Research Center, 40% of people between the ages of 18 and 34 agreed that offensive statements should be outlawed. Now, I grew up in an era where it seemed to me that it was the ultra-conservatives, it was the radical right that wanted to shut down anything that disagreed with them. The fundamentalists who were out to, shoot everybody out of the way. And I grew up in a world where the word liberal meant you were open, and that you had your own set of values, but you were open to other people's expression, and that we got to be tolerant of people who disagree with us. In fact, in my college days, taking a Bible course on a secular campus, I made a comment about faith and works, and in the class when asked by the professor to explain the difference. And as I started to talk about it, the professor really lit into me. I was a freshman. What did I know? I'm just speaking my biblical faith. And he didn't like it. And afterwards, a number of students came to me. Now, they were not believers. They were not Christians like I was. But they picked up right away on an interesting thing, that our professor was open to all kinds of religious views. He had a Buddhist come in. He had an atheist come in. He had, any other religious views. He'd invite speakers to come in and share. But when I, as an evangelical, Bible-believing Christian, expressed my view, you would have thought that I called him the devil himself. He just lit into me. And the other students noticed this, and this was their comment, that he appears to be liberal. He's open to everything, Don, except your point of view, which was interesting. He could tolerate everybody else except me, who simply says, I believe the Bible is true. Now, as we move through life, we now find ourselves many, many years since I've been in college, and there is now from the left a whole move to shut down debate, and primarily to shut down a conservative point of view. The Bible, the Constitution of the United States says we have the right to free speech. And young people today want to limit free speech. But the free speech they want to eliminate is mine, not theirs. So they want to have a right to say what they believe, but they don't want me to have a right to say what I believe. Now, there are beliefs in this world that I think are pretty bad. And I think people who have anti-Semitic beliefs, I think that is just wrong to be, having those beliefs and everything. But I don't want to say you can't say it. What I want is, let's sit down and have a debate, and you stand up in public and tell me why. What are your reasons for hating the Jews? And I can debate by coming in and refuting every reason that you say as to why Jews are bad and evil people. But see, they don't want to have that debate. I'm willing to let the repugnant person speak if they'll let me speak. But on college campuses right now, there's this radical movement to shut down any conservative voice, any voice that represents the Bible. A good example, we post picture signs out in front of our church, and we rotate them every week, and one of them says this: abortion is murder, and you know it. Now, that's my belief. My belief is that abortion is murder. We can have a debate about that. Let's sit down. Don't yell. Don't tell me I can't say that. You tell me why you think it isn't, and let's have a forum, and you come in and tell me why you don't think it is, and if I'm allowed to speak, will tell you why I believe it's murder. By the way, the liberal left doesn't want high school seniors seeing movies about abortions. They don't want pregnant mothers to have to look at a movie that shows the dismemberment of a body or a baby burned through scalding. They don't want to see that. They don't even tell people. See, they want to shut down any discussion of the fact of what abortion is. So we say abortion is murder, and you know it. Now, you can come by the next week, And it might say the one that says God has laws and you know it. Now, I add that phrase, and you know it, because, see, I believe the Bible, and the Bible says that man is without excuse. So you can insist, well, I don't know it. Well, you have a right to that opinion. I'm going to choose to believe God. And I'm going to choose to believe that there is a day of judgment coming, and that you will stand in front of God. And God will be able to demonstrate to you why it is you knew these things and consciously were unwilling to accept them. That's God's business, not mine. But then we have one that creates controversy, and that says that marriage is between a man and a woman, and you know it. Now, the world has known that for years. As Dennis Prager says here, the view that male and female are distinctive identities is one of the few unquestioned foundational views of every society in history until now. Every society in history, whatever they called marriage, knows that marriage is between a man and a woman. They know that. But in our society, it is now called into question. So my sign simply says, marriage is between a man and a woman, and you know it. I'm not saying if you disagree with that statement, you're going to hell. I'm not saying if you disagree with that statement, you ought to be hung, and drawn and quartered. I'm not saying you should be executed. I'm not even saying you should be put in jail. I'm just stating my belief. As an American, we have a whole variety of beliefs. My belief is marriage is between a man and a woman, and I also believe that in your heart of hearts, in your inner soul, you know that to be true. Okay? But, recently I heard of an educator in town who, driving down Bowtell Street, saw that sign, and it made him so mad that he had to go post it on his I don't know if it's Facebook or Twitter, and even made the comment, we ought to go down to that church and rip that sign down. Now wait a minute. If you put a sign up that say, I believe that gays have a right to marry each other, I disagree with your sign, but I'm not going to go rip it down. Why would I rip it down? You have a right in America to express that. I disagree with that sign, but you have a right to express that. Why is it that you won't give me a right to express what I believe is a very biblical point of view, that marriage is between a man and a woman, and you know it? But see, that's the reaction in our culture now. It is a reaction not to let's have a debate. It's not a reaction to let's talk about our differences. It's a reaction coming from a radical perspective to shut down and silence anybody that disagrees. Not only is that anti-biblical, but more fundamental to our discussion in Fitchburg, that is against the Constitution of the United States, guaranteeing my right to free speech. And yet we find, as Dennis Prager says, that nearly half of young people today believe that free speech should be curtailed. Isn't that amazing? So I guess then if political correctness police ever come into being, that because I have that view and because I express that view, I will be known as a hater. And later in this series, we're going to get to the prediction of these days, where the prophet said there's coming a day when people will call good evil and they'll call evil good. Very vital that we understand that the Bible is God's history book. It's not only telling us what was and what is, but telling us what is coming and describing the end from the beginning, talking about as you go down this path, here's the end result. Very early in Deuteronomy, God said, I put in front of you a way of life and a way of death. And then God says, choose life, be wise, choose life. And the whole book of the Bible is about how to choose a path of life. But you can make other choices, but what you can't choose are the consequences of those choices. You can choose a policy, you're free to choose it, but you can't choose the end result of that policy. You can choose to give away money to everybody, but you can't choose the consequences of giving away the money. You can choose to give free college to all Americans, but you can't choose the economic collapse that will take place if in fact that became a law. You can choose that the minimum wage for everybody, including McDonald's workers, should be $15 an hour, like they've done in Oregon. You can't choose the economic consequences of that, which means that jobs will be lost because the fast food chains will begin to automate. And they now have machinery in the restaurant industry that very quickly can replace a lot of the food handling that goes on in all the fast food chains, and they're going to have to do it. Otherwise, the cost of your Big Mac is going to be more than you're willing to pay. You see, it's basic economics. You can choose that path, but you cannot choose the consequences of that path. Let me quote some other things from Dennis Prager for our consideration. He writes, quote, "The ideas that America should be a melting pot or that all Americans should identify as an American are now utterly, in educated company, unspeakable. In fact, many college campuses no longer have an American flag on their campus because some students regard it as offensive and representational of imperialism and capitalism." Excuse me, this is America. You know, my daughter works at a part-time at a place, she has her own business, but in addition, she works at a place locally in our communities where a co-worker is of another nationality. She immigrated to the country, I believe, from the Philippines. And so she was studying to pass her citizenship test. And the day came, where she passed it. Now, she's working full-time. She's going to school. She took her test. She passed it. And the day she passed it, she came in with a little American flag, waving the flag. "I'm an American. I'm an American." Yes. And all the people were excited. You see, that's what immigration is about. Immigration is you come in and you become part of our productive society. You come in and you get a job and you work the job and you take the citizenship test and you pass it and you wave the American flag. I'm so grateful for this country which provided me an opportunity to get an education and to get a job. It's not that you come into this country and you don't want the American flag, you want your own flag, you want to speak your own language and not English, and you want welfare to take care of you. But you see, to talk that way is now politically incorrect. That signs that the country is in deep danger. It is a world gone crazy. Religious institutions, Dennis says, which for the most part of American history have been the most important institutions in everyday American life, are being rendered irrelevant. And a larger number of Americans, many more than ever before, do not identify with any religion. The traditional family. Remember, this is all about God saying we're going to move into a period where people are going to call good evil. What we know is good and always knew is good, oh, that's evil, you're a hater. And they're going to call evil what we've always known as evil. They're going to start calling that good. There's a reversal of morality that is already present. And so Dennis writes, the traditional family has become nothing more than one of many options open to Americans. For the first time in American history, there are more unmarried women than married women. The number of adults aged 34 and under who have never been married is nearing 50%. In recent years, data show just 20% of Americans aged 18 to 29 are married compared to 60% in 1960. Wow, what's going on with the family? Additionally, more than 40% of American births are to unmarried women. Now, these are facts. And if someone says, you're racist, I'm not racist by reporting facts. You know, if there's an ethnic group that has a particular history of a disease, to point that out is not to be racist. It is to say that that ethnic group has an issue that they need to deal with, and we would do well if we could help them deal with that issue. But if they blame the issue on others, then they're not accepting it's an issue. Let me give you a good example. I just read about a woman leader. She and her husband were Chabad emissaries down in South Carolina, running a Chabad center on a university campus. And she died of a disease called Bloom's disease. She was only 29 years old. And that's a very, very, very rare disease. And most of the young people, children that have it, die in their 20s. And so it's known. But it's clearly identified as most frequently being those in the Ashkenazi Jewish community. It's not to say it doesn't show up in other places as chromosomes get mixed, but it is predominantly a risk among Ashkenazi Jews. And so to say that Ashkenazi Jews are prone to this disease doesn't mean they're bad people. That's not a racist comment. It does mean that if an Ashkenazi Jewish man is marrying an Ashkenazi Jewish woman, it might be good for them to have a genetic test to ascertain if they're carrying that chromosome which might trigger that disease, so they can make an intelligent decision about the risk of their marriage in having children. Whether they might want to adopt as opposed to giving birth to a child if it's high risk of that disease showing up. The choice is still theirs, but to point out and to say to them, you might want to get tested to find out whether or not you're carrying that chromosome is not a racist comment. And those who would assert that it is are ignorant of racism and ignorant of dealing with the issue of self-justification by blaming others. Now, I say that because I'm going to share two statistics that are evidence of a dark time in America, of good becoming evil, evil becoming good, of a collapse of society that we can ignore or we can blame or we can address. Dennis Prager reports here that more than 40% of American births are now to unmarried women. So in Massachusetts, if the statistic holds, out of every 10 children birthed in 2016 in hospitals in Massachusetts, then 4 out of 10 are going to be to unmarried people. But listen to this. Among Hispanic women, the percentage is over 53. And among black women, the rate is over 71%. So that means within the African American community, 7 out of 10 births that are going to take place this year are to unmarried African American women. Now, add to that per capita, not raw numbers, but per capita, by percentage of population, the greatest number of abortions are in the African American community. There's a reason why Planned Parenthood is so active among African Americans, and I won't go there in this broadcast. But if you take that, then if those abortions stop, then the number would even be higher. Now, that's a problem of a collapsing society. That is a collapsing society. If we don't address the problem, then that becomes an issue that begins to contaminate and consume the resources of our economy. I'm not talking about a lack of compassion. I'm talking about a lack of being willing to put the facts on the table and say, how can we fix this? Because if we don't fix it, we got a problem. Now, let me give you another example. You know, there's a new virus going around that was basically out in the Asian Pacific region. It showed up in Brazil, so there's some question about whether or not the Olympics should go on. But now they're beginning to identify cases of that virus here in the United States. So the CDC just last month raised the level of concern about that virus to the point where they are sending proactive notifications out to all healthcare officials and doctors across the United States of what to look for. The challenge is at this point they don't have a vaccine to address that virus. And the CDC for years has been trying to deal within the medical community. How are we going to deal with a super virus that we can't conquer? And physicians within the CDC don't say if it happens, they say when it happens. We are a generation who cannot remember the influenza epidemic that swept the world and tens of millions of people died. I mean, millions of. We don't study in school anymore about the Black Plague, where daily within cities, hundreds of people were dying, being left in the streets because of a plague. We can't even fathom that. And we want to riot and tell the government, you need to do something. Well, there are certain things the government may not be able to do. But the CDC says we got a serious potential problem. Well, we have a serious potential problem with our economy, and we have a serious potential problem in our family structure that's being undermined, and yet we can't address it because the groundwork of political correctness says, we can't do those things. So where are we coming? We're coming again to Genesis 6:5. Yahweh saw how great man's wickedness on earth had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil all the time. The challenge is that calling good evil, and calling things that we all knew at one point was evil, now calling them good, has now infected the church, so that the church no longer is a voice to call the world back into light. Our Jewish roots teach us that we are in this earth to make it a better place, that we are to live at a different level and act at a different level and speak at a different level than the world. If in fact the salt has lost its flavor, says Yeshua, it's good for nothing but to be thrown out. Well, you and I are called to be the salt of the earth, and so we will continue this discussion about a world gone crazy and how we as Christians and believers in the Word of God are set here to make a difference. This is Pastor Don Long. I look forward to talking to you next week.